In a world where justice is often blind, one case captivated the nation like no other. A young woman's tragic disappearance, a killer hiding in plain sight, and a mystery that seemed unsolvable for years. But what if I told you that everything you think you know about this case might just be wrong? Moriah Wilson's murder was a case that left us with more questions than answers. Her family, a grieving community, and an entire nation, all left to wonder, who really did it? With details you won't find anywhere else, we'll uncover the truth behind the shocking twists, the justice system's failures, and the dark secrets that might still be lurking. Welcome to Dark Chronicles, where shadows hide the truth. It was a quiet evening in Maplewood, a town where nothing ever seemed to happen until the night of July 17th. That night changed everything. Moriah Wilson, a bright 24-year-old aspiring journalist, vanished without a trace. No warning, no struggle, just gone. Her last known location? A dimly lit gas station on the outskirts of town, caught in a grainy security camera footage. Authorities were quick to respond, but what started as a missing persons case soon spiraled into something far more sinister. Days passed, then weeks, and the leads began to dry up. Friends and family clung to hope, but behind the scenes, detectives feared the worst. Then, almost 3 months later, a breakthrough, one that sent chills down the spine of an entire community. A hiker trekking through a remote wooded area stumbled upon something horrifying. Buried beneath a shallow grave lay the remains of Moriah Wilson. The search for a missing woman had just turned into a murder investigation. The crime scene told a brutal story. Forensic teams worked tirelessly, uncovering every detail, every possible clue. The way she was buried, the condition of her body, everything pointed to a perpetrator who knew exactly what they were doing. Someone careful. Someone who had done this before. But there was one key problem. No obvious suspect, no apparent motive, no clear connection between Moriah and her killer. That was until investigators took a closer look at that gas station footage. At first glance, nothing seemed out of place. Moriah was seen filling up her car, checking her phone, then stepping inside the store. But then in the background, something. A shadowy figure. Someone lurking just outside the camera's view. Could this be the person responsible? The police enhanced the footage. They traced Moriah's last known steps. They reconstructed her final moments. And that's when they found it. Something so small, yet so crucial. A single frame of the footage where the reflection of a man's face was captured in the gas station window. A face they would soon come to know all too well. Who was he? And how did he slip through the cracks for so long? This is the story of the relentless hunt for Moriah Wilson's killer. A case that exposed hidden darkness, tested the limits of forensic science, and proved that no secret stays buried forever. The image from the gas station footage wasn't crystal clear, but it was enough. Investigators now had a potential suspect, a man, possibly in his late 30s or early 40s, with a rugged appearance. He was seen standing near a black sedan, parked just a few feet away from Moriah's car. Who was he? Authorities ran the image through facial recognition databases, cross-referencing it with local criminal records. No immediate match. But that didn't stop them. They widened their net, pulling surveillance footage from nearby businesses, traffic cameras, even ATM machines. Slowly, a pattern began to emerge. The same black sedan, spotted multiple times along the highway that night. Then, something even more chilling. Footage from a different gas station, just 15 miles away, recorded less than an hour after Moriah disappeared. The same man. The same car. But this time, something new. He was seen wiping down the passenger seat before driving off into the night. That was enough for detectives to act. They traced the license plate, identifying the vehicle's registered owner, Daniel Cross. Cross lived alone in a rundown house on the outskirts of town. No immediate criminal history, no known ties to Moriah. On paper, he was just another guy. But when detectives knocked on his door, something felt off. He answered, looking calm, maybe even too calm. "We're investigating a missing persons case," one detective said. Cross didn't flinch. "Never heard of her," he replied. But when they showed him the gas station footage, his demeanor changed. He hesitated. His eyes flickered toward his car, parked just outside. That was all the confirmation detectives needed. With a search warrant in hand, investigators combed through Cross's vehicle. And there, buried under layers of fabric in the trunk, they found a single strand of hair. Brown, long, a perfect match to Moriah, but they needed more. They scoured Cross's home, his basement, his garage, even the backyard. Then, in the dim glow of a UV light, something horrifying appeared. A faint but unmistakable stain on the trunk liner of his car. A presumptive test confirmed it. Blood. Now, they had him. Daniel Cross was brought in for questioning. The once calm man now fidgeted in his chair, his hands twitching. Detectives laid out the evidence piece by piece, watching his reaction. "Her hair was in your trunk." No response. "Her blood found in your car." Still silent. Then, a final blow. Phone records. His cell pinged near Moriah's last known location that night, just minutes before she disappeared. Cross exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. "Maybe I gave her a ride," he muttered. But detectives knew better. This wasn't just a coincidence. This was murder. Detectives leaned in, their eyes locked on Daniel Cross. "A ride?" one of them repeated. "Then why didn't you mention that earlier?" Cross swallowed hard, shifting in his seat. I didn't think it mattered." Detectives weren't buying it. "Daniel, let's cut through the lies," one of them said. "We have your car, we have Moriah's DNA, and we have you near the scene. Now's your chance to tell us what really happened before it's too late." For a moment, Cross looked like he might talk. His lips parted, his breathing grew heavier. But then, he leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, eyes narrowed. "Lawyer," he muttered, and just like that, the interrogation was over. News of Cross's arrest spread like wildfire. Every headline screamed the same question. Was this Moriah Wilson's killer? The public was divided. Some believed the case was ironclad. Others weren't so sure. "Where's the body?" skeptics asked. Without a body, there was no direct confirmation of Moriah's fate. And in a courtroom, doubt could be a powerful weapon. Still, prosecutors moved forward, charging Cross with kidnapping and first-degree murder. But could they make it stick? The trial of Daniel Cross opened to a packed courtroom. Every seat was filled. Journalists lined the back wall, cameras poised, pens ready. The prosecution came out strong. They laid out every piece of evidence, the surveillance footage, the hair, the blood. Then, the most damning piece. A forensic expert testified that the amount of blood found in Cross's trunk was consistent with a fatal injury. But the defense had their own strategy. No body, the defense attorney argued. No murder weapon, no eyewitnesses. They painted Cross as a man in the wrong place at the wrong time, a victim of circumstantial evidence and a public desperate for closure. And for a moment, it worked, until the prosecution played their trump card. A woman stepped onto the stand, her face pale, her hands trembling. She had a story to tell. One night, months before Moriah vanished, she had accepted a ride from a man in a black sedan. At first, he seemed nice, friendly even. But then, things took a turn. "He locked the doors," she whispered, "and he wouldn't let me leave." Her voice cracked as she described the struggle, the fear, the moment she thought she wouldn't make it out alive. But somehow, she had. And the man who had done it? She pointed across the courtroom. Daniel Cross. The jury sat frozen. The gallery murmured. This case wasn't just about Moriah Wilson anymore. It was about who Daniel Cross really was, and the truth was more terrifying than anyone had imagined. As the trial continued, the defense was scrambling. They'd always relied on the strength of their doubt, but now, with the shocking testimony from the woman in the courtroom, things were looking grim. They needed something, anything, that could weaken the case against Daniel Cross. In a last-ditch effort, they called an expert witness, a forensic analyst who argued that the blood found in Cross's trunk could have been planted. According to the expert, the blood patterns were inconsistent with a violent struggle, and there was a chance that someone else had planted it during the investigation. The prosecution was quick to rebut, pointing out that the DNA evidence from the crime scene matched Cross's. There was no denying his involvement. They also reminded the jury of the physical evidence, Moriah's blood, which was only linked to one person, Daniel Cross. But the defense wasn't finished. They attempted to discredit the woman who had testified about her own encounter with Cross, questioning her memory and credibility. They painted her as an unreliable witness, suggesting that her testimony was nothing more than a case of mistaken identity. However, as the defense tried to cast doubt, the prosecution continued to hammer home the most important piece of evidence. Moriah Wilson was gone. Her disappearance wasn't just a random tragedy. It was the culmination of a pattern of behavior exhibited by Daniel Cross. And the jury couldn't ignore that. The jury was sent to deliberate. The room was tense. People were on edge. Could they come to a conclusion that would bring justice to Moriah Wilson? Or was there still enough doubt to spare Daniel Cross from a conviction? Over the next several hours, the jury carefully reviewed the evidence. The lack of a body was, without a doubt, a major obstacle, but the rest of the case was overwhelmingly against Daniel Cross. From the DNA to the witness testimony to the expert analysis, the prosecution had built a solid case. Finally, after a long deliberation, the jury returned to the courtroom. The judge called for silence as they prepared to deliver their verdict. The tension was palpable. Everyone held their breath. The verdict was read aloud: guilty of first-degree murder and kidnapping. When the verdict came down, the courtroom erupted. The victim's family broke down in tears of relief and grief, knowing that they had finally gotten justice for Moriah. On the other side, Daniel Cross's family was devastated, left to wonder how their loved one had become embroiled in such a terrible crime. For many, this wasn't the end of the story. Moriah's family may have finally seen justice, but the question still lingered. Where was Moriah's body? Though Daniel Cross was convicted, the pain of not having closure continued to haunt the loved ones of the young woman whose life was stolen too soon. And for some, the case only deepened the questions surrounding the darkness that may still exist within the man who had been living among them all along. As soon as the verdict was delivered, the media stormed the courthouse steps, eager to report every detail of the case. The trial had captured the public's attention for months, and now the world wanted answers. The story was everywhere, on the evening news, online articles, and social media feeds. The media's role in the case had been a double-edged sword, both shedding light on the dark details and fueling speculation. The media quickly focused on Moriah Wilson's life, sharing her story with the world, her dreams, her future that was cruelly cut short. People across the country began to connect with Moriah's family, empathizing with their pain and offering their support. The public was now emotionally invested. They needed closure, just as much as Moriah's family did. The outpouring of support was overwhelming. Many viewers took to social media, posting about how they felt the pain of losing someone who had so much potential. Her story was now personal to them, a reminder of the fragility of life. But the case wasn't just about Moriah Wilson's tragic end. It was about the danger that lurked in seemingly ordinary places. The possibility that someone you knew could harbor a darkness you never suspected. And the media was quick to exploit this element, pushing the narrative of how Daniel Cross had been hiding in plain sight, deceiving those around him. The small town where Moriah and Daniel lived was reeling. Neighbors, friends, and even casual acquaintances of both the victim and the defendant were interviewed on local news, expressing their shock at the outcome. "I never saw this coming," one neighbor said, clearly shaken. "He seemed like such a nice guy." Others were more willing to speak out about their suspicions of Daniel now that the case had come to light. It was clear that everyone had missed signs that in retrospect now seemed obvious. But what the media didn't show were the darker undercurrents of speculation and conspiracy theories that began to swirl. As the media continued its coverage, a wave of conspiracy theories began to bubble up, fueled by online forums and armchair detectives. There were whispers that Daniel Cross wasn't acting alone. Some believed he had an accomplice, someone else involved in Moriah's disappearance. They pointed to the fact that Moriah's body was never found as proof that there was more to the story. Others questioned the validity of the DNA evidence, suggesting it could have been fabricated or misinterpreted by law enforcement. Social media users debated whether the investigation was too hasty, with some claiming that the police had rushed to find a suspect, jumping to conclusions based on circumstantial evidence. As the days turned into weeks, more and more online communities picked apart every detail of the case. The public's thirst for answers only grew, and with it, the intensity of the theories. For Moriah's family, this was a constant source of frustration. They wanted justice, not more questions. But as one family member told the media, people will always question. It's just part of this world. But we know what we've seen. We know who did this to our daughter, our sister, our friend. The trial itself became the focal point of public attention. As more and more details emerged, it was clear this was not a typical case. It was a high-stakes courtroom drama, and the stakes were higher than anyone anticipated. On one side was Moriah's family, seeking justice, closure, and the truth. On the other side, Daniel Cross and his defense team worked tirelessly to cast doubt on the evidence and portray their client as innocent. One of the most crucial parts of the trial was the testimonies. Friends, family, and law enforcement officers took the stand, sharing their personal experiences and recounting everything they knew about Moriah, Daniel, and the events leading up to that fateful day. Every word spoken seemed to carry weight, each testimony painting a picture of a community shaken to its core. The most dramatic moments came during cross-examinations. The defense attorney aggressively questioned the prosecution's witnesses, attempting to undermine their credibility. At times, the exchanges became heated. Daniel Cross's attorney argued that the evidence against him was circumstantial and that no solid proof existed linking him directly to Moriah's death. But the prosecution was not about to give up easily. They brought in experts who testified about the DNA evidence, the forensic evidence from the crime scene, and the reconstructive timeline of the events. These experts dismantled the defense's arguments, leaving little room for doubt. The media and the public were captivated. Every move in the courtroom was closely watched, with each twist and turn contributing to the growing anticipation of a verdict. As the trial neared its conclusion, the emotions ran high. Moriah's parents sat quietly, their faces stoic, but their eyes filled with a quiet anguish. They had endured months of painful testimony, watching the man accused of murdering their daughter sit across from them, seemingly unaffected by the gravity of the charges. In the final days of the trial, it was time for the closing arguments. The prosecution painted a harrowing picture of a young woman robbed of her future, a life snuffed out by a man who thought he could get away with it. They implored the jury to hold Daniel Cross accountable for his actions, to honor Moriah's life by delivering justice. On the other hand, the defense fought to the very end, urging the jury to question the evidence and remember that every person is innocent until proven guilty. They painted Daniel as a man who was wrongly accused, a victim of circumstantial evidence, and a flawed investigation. The jury was left with a monumental task, deciding whether Daniel Cross was guilty of Moriah Wilson's murder. The tension in the courtroom was palpable as the final words were spoken, and the fate of both the defendant and Moriah's family hung in the balance. The courtroom was silent as the jury deliberated. The world outside seemed to pause, waiting for the decision that would change the lives of everyone involved. Would Daniel Cross be found guilty, Or would he be acquitted, leaving Moriah's family with unanswered questions? After what felt like an eternity, the jury returned. The tension in the room was unbearable. Moriah's family sat together, holding hands, their eyes glued to the jury as they filed back into the box. Daniel Cross sat nervously at the defense table, surrounded by his legal team, while the prosecution team stood ready to respond. The judge asked the jury for their decision. With a deep breath, the foreperson stood, holding the verdict in their hand. The room seemed to hold its breath, each person on the edge of their seat. And then, the words that would forever change the case were spoken. The guilty verdict sent shockwaves through the courtroom. Moriah's family, who had waited for justice for so long, let out a quiet sob of relief and grief. They had finally received what they had been waiting for, a sense of closure, but at a great emotional cost. Daniel Cross was led away in handcuffs, his face showing no emotion as the reality of his conviction set in. The courtroom erupted in whispers, gasps, and muted conversations, but no one was prepared for the flood of media coverage that would follow. Once the verdict was handed down, the media frenzy surrounding the case reached a fever pitch. News outlets from all over the country scrambled for interviews, headlines, and breaking news updates. For Moriah's family, the attention was overwhelming, but they also saw it as a small solace. After years of uncertainty, they finally had the answers they needed. In the weeks following the trial, the story of Moriah's life and death became a national topic of conversation. News outlets re-examined every detail of the case, and the debate about the justice system, the flaws in the investigation, and the impact of the trial on the community gained momentum. While the verdict brought a sense of finality for Moriah's family, it didn't end the controversy. Public opinion was divided. Some believed the case was a clear example of justice being served, while others questioned the investigation's thoroughness and the fairness of the trial. Supporters of Daniel Cross claimed that the trial was flawed, pointing to what they saw as inconsistencies in the prosecution's case. They argued that the evidence was too circumstantial and that Daniel was a victim of a biased legal system. Some even suggested that the real killer might still be out there, free to walk the streets. On the other hand, those who believed in Moriah's innocence were adamant that justice had been rightfully served. They saw the guilty verdict as a sign that the justice system could hold perpetrators accountable, even when the evidence was difficult to come by. For them, the conviction was a victory for truth and a reminder that no one is above the law. The debates about the trial only intensified as new information continued to emerge, with media outlets digging into Moriah's background and the events leading up to her tragic death. With every new piece of information, the public became more and more fascinated with the case, and the questions surrounding it remained at the forefront of national discussions. As the months passed after the trial, Moriah's story didn't fade from the public consciousness. Her name became a symbol of resilience and the relentless pursuit of justice. While her family was left to navigate the aftermath of her loss, they were determined to ensure her memory was honored. Moriah's family set out to make a difference, focusing on awareness campaigns to highlight issues such as missing persons and victim support. They worked with organizations that helped families of crime victims, hoping to bring attention to the struggles that many face in similar situations. Her parents used their grief as fuel to educate the public on the dangers of abduction and how to better protect vulnerable individuals. The case of Moriah Wilson became a lesson in justice and its complexities. Even though the jury had delivered their verdict, the investigation and legal proceedings had raised many questions that were never fully resolved. Many still wondered about the details of the case that were not made public, the evidence that was never presented, and the procedural aspects that may have influenced the outcome. These were points of contention for some and a source of relief for others. For Moriah's family, the fight for justice didn't end with the trial. They became vocal advocates for victims' rights, speaking out at public events and contributing to a nationwide dialogue about how the justice system deals with high-profile cases. They emphasized the need for more support for families who face the same heartache and the importance of law enforcement reform to prevent future tragedies like Moriah's. As for Daniel Cross, his fate was sealed. Sentenced to life in prison, he would never be able to walk free again. But even as he served his time, there were still those who questioned whether the right person had been convicted. The case left a shadow over the community, and its resolution, while bringing closure to many, also left lingering doubts in the minds of others. Would they ever truly know the full truth of what happened to Moriah? The legacy of Moriah Wilson is now forever etched in the hearts of those who fought for her justice. Her story, filled with pain, love, and resilience, sparked conversations about how we, as a society, can better protect the most vulnerable, and how the system can better serve justice without leaving room for doubt. Her name continues to resonate, not only as the victim of a tragedy, but as a reminder of the cost of justice and the need for continued vigilance in ensuring fairness for everyone. As time passes, Moriah's case serves as a legacy that will never be forgotten, a testament to a family's fight, a community's grief, and a nation's ongoing battle for justice.
So that's how crimes end, and if you like this episode, don't forget to like and subscribe and turn on the notifications. If you want me to do some special crimes in all over the world, comment down below, or you can send us direct through email, and I will see you in all my videos. See ya!